Today guys, we're going to be reviewing the FE 35mm 1.8 full frame that Sony just announced in August versus 35 2.8 Zeiss. So let's get to it. So as you can see guys, the Zeiss 35 is quite small, we all know that, and it's extremely light. If we all think that the 35-1.8 is light, you have to see how this lens is. It's virtually nothing. This is a little hefty. I know people say it's very light, but compared to this, it's definitely a good size. This to me is a good weight. This just seems unbelievably light, which is very nice, and which is why it's usually recommended if you travel. So as you can see with size, it's almost double, almost. If you take off boat lens hood, and remember this has a nice feature where you can take off just the front, or you can take that off. And this is nice because it's a nice locking mechanism. But if you take those both off, you can see it's almost double. So definitely quite on the small size. Build quality to me is the same. I don't see any difference. I feel like the metal is exactly the same between these two. They both have that nice Sony finish, that matte finish, which I love. You can see in the light they're pretty much identical. I feel like maybe because this is newer, this has maybe more of like a yellowish metallic, whereas this is more of a white. Maybe, but in my hands they look exactly the same. It could just be the light above me. What I did notice about the Sony lens is that they tend to do this, which I'm not a big fan of. They'll have this matte finish, but then past the focus ring they have this brushed finish. So it just seems out of place. Everything is that nice matte, and then here it's not, and you can see on the Sony Zeiss 35 it's matte throughout. In fact, even the hood, the painting of it matches that same style. So even though this is all plastic, it feels very, very uniform. So I definitely like that part, and I'm talking about this here. In terms of the ring, I think any Zeiss lens is always nice and smooth. The 24mm that I'm currently filming on by Zeiss on the A6000 is also that. It seems about the same. If I had to compare them, I would say this is definitely better. But this is also new, so maybe it's just not broken in though. But this just seems to have a looser feel. This definitely seems to have a little resistance, so perhaps better for videographers out there. Obviously this is a very simple lens. There's really no buttons on it, whereas the new 35mm lens, they added two. You have the customized button on the side, which I used to use a lot on my A7 III for the eye autofocus, but the new firmware makes that automatic on the half press autofocus, so I don't tend to use this as much. But what is nice is the autofocus and manual focus, so this is nice if you definitely need to switch faster. Otherwise it's pretty much the same. That's my initial impressions of the lens. One other thing to note is the focusing distance is 1.15 feet. In my opinion, is quite far, because I do like to make sort of macro shots where you get within a few inches of what you're trying to take. And what I definitely like about the new Sony 35 is that their distance, which is located on the ring, as you can see, it's 0.73, which is about 5 inches shorter. And that little distance for me is a big deal, because so this would be focusing on the dollar. Let me see how close I can get before I lose it. Right about there. So it's definitely a good hand away. You can see I'm just taking my hand. It's definitely about 10 inches from the edge of the lens. So from the edge of the lens is about 10 inches, which to me was far. I know on screen everything looks out of focus, but I'm at the edge. And so what's nice about the new 35mm is that the distance is almost half that, which is amazing because I'm used to that sort of distance coming from the crop sensor, 24, which is a 35 equivalent. And you can see how much closer I can get. Look at that, look how much closer I can get. And that is pretty much an arm's length away from the body, and maybe only about 4, 5, 6 inches from the tip of the lens. So I know that doesn't feel like a big difference, but what's nice is that 5 extra inches shorter is nice, because what I like to do is I like to sort of use my thumb against the body and against what I'm trying to take a photo. Almost acts like a little tripod. But besides that, this is a great lens. I feel like the sharpness is definitely slightly sharper, but I'll take some test shots with this in on the A7 III with the latest firmware, and I'll do it in uncompressed RAW, and I'll upload the files, and that way you guys can test it. And the scene we'll use today is this, which is $10 bill, which I feel like has a lot of detail in it, so we can really compare. And then I'll take a photo. So the focus that I'll do is I'll focus right there in the center. I'll focus on the T 1.8, so you can see what it looks like on this lens. I'll do it on 2.8 on the boat lens, and I'll do it at 5.6 also on boat lens, so that you guys can see exactly what that looks like. So I hope this is useful, because I know before I wanted this, I wanted to see a review and there was none. So I hope this might be helpful for someone who's also looking to upgrade, perhaps, between these two. Okay, so here's a shot taken at the 35 at 2.8, and the same shot taken with the Zeiss 35 at 2.8 wide open. Just showing you back and forth. And a side by side. So to me, the Sony at 2.8 is slightly better, which makes sense since that's not wide open. And here's at 5.6. And I'll do a split down the center. This one's close, but I do give the edge to the 35. Let me know if you agree. And here's that 1.8 on the right. Let's go on to the dollar. And here's a split down. This is at 2.8. Again, I think it's very close, but I do give it a slight edge to the 35. And here's at 1.8, just for comparison. So as you expect, not that sharp wide open. I also tested the autofocus off camera, and the reason why I'm not putting in to the video is because I found them to be identical, literally identical. There was nothing I can throw at the Zeiss versus the 35 Sony that was any different. I found them to be exactly the same. Even focusing on a dark object, which sometimes the Zeiss would struggle with, the Sony also struggle with. It's just hard to get autofocus when there's no contrast there. So if you're looking for any type of autofocus speed improvement, you're definitely not going to find it on this one. Also, eye autofocus seems to be exactly the same. Face detection, all of that seems to be, like I said, identical. So to me overall, I do give a slight edge to the new Sony 35. I think it's sharper at least 2.8, which makes sense since it's not wide open, but you get the benefit of 1.8. So for me, I will be selling the Zeiss 2.8 just because I want that 1.8, but if I had to base it on just the sharpness, I probably would not have sold it, because to me it's very similar, and I'm usually very pixel peeping, so for me I would not have sold it and take the loss between the price range that I'll probably get for it. But that 1.8 for me is important, and seeing that it's slightly sharper for me is just an added benefit, and the minimum focus distance being half is another selling point. So I hope this was helpful to anyone who has the Zeiss 35 or someone who's looking to choose between the two. So if anyone has the Sony Zeiss 24mm 1.8 for their crop sensor, this is it, which I really love. I feel like it's one of those underrated lenses, but it's amazing. And you can see if you have the 35 1.8, it's very similar, just a hair taller.